Hi, I'm Jacqueline. 3 years ago, my coworkers called me a minimum wage loser who'd never amount to anything. They laughed when I brought a generic brand lunch in a paper bag. They snickered when I rode the bus instead of driving. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly building something they couldn't imagine. Something that would make their monthly salaries look like pocket change. Last Tuesday, I walked into Meridian Technologies as their new CEO. The same people who once mocked me for cleaning their conference rooms were now sitting across from me, waiting to hear if they still had jobs. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the break room of Meridian Technologies, casting that harsh white glow that made everyone look slightly sick. I sat alone at the corner table, the one with the wobbly leg that nobody else wanted, unwrapping my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Around me, conversations buzzed about weekend plans, new cars, vacation destinations. None of it included me. Marcus Hendricks leaned against the vending machine, his pressed khakis and button-down shirt marking him as one of the junior analysts. He caught sight of my lunch and nudged his buddy Trevor Walsh. "Look at that," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "PB&J again. What is this, elementary school?" Trevor laughed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Maybe that's all the cafeteria allowance covers." He made air quotes around, quote, cafeteria allowance like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. I kept eating, not looking up. I'd learned that reacting only made it worse. These moments had become routine over the past 8 months since I started working here. Every day brought new reminders that I didn't belong in their world of expense accounts and company cars. Sarah Chen walked over to their group, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum. She was one of the marketing coordinators, always impeccably dressed, always ready with a cutting remark. "Did you see her getting off the city bus this morning?" she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "In this weather? I mean, I get that not everyone can afford a car, but there's Uber, right?" "Maybe she's saving up for something big," Marcus said with mock seriousness. "Like a bicycle." The laughter that followed felt like needles. I finished my sandwich in silence, crumpled the paper bag, and stood to leave. As I walked past their group, Sarah's voice followed me. "Hey, Jacqueline, if you need a ride sometime, I could probably squeeze you into my back seat. You know, charity work." I paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. "Thanks, but I'm fine." "Of course you are," Trevor called out. "Fine with minimum wage forever." The hallway outside the break room was quieter, but their words echoed in my head as I made my way back to the custodial closet. That's where I spent most of my days, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, wiping down conference room tables where people made more in an hour than I made in a week. At least, that's what they thought. I pulled out my phone and checked the encrypted messaging app hidden behind a calculator icon. 3 new messages from my development team in Seattle. The beta testing results were better than expected. User engagement was up 40% from last week. Investment inquiries were pouring in from firms I'd only dreamed of working with 2 years ago. I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd had all day. If they only knew. The afternoon passed slowly. I cleaned the executive offices on the 15th floor, careful not to disturb the important papers scattered across mahogany desks. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city sprawling below, all glass and steel and ambition. Somewhere down there, in a small office building across town, my real work was happening. At 5:30, I clocked out and headed for the employee exit. The main lobby was off-limits to custodial staff during business hours, but I could see through the glass doors into the gleaming marble space where the real employees gathered. Women in tailored suits checked their phones while waiting for rideshares. Men in expensive watches discussed dinner plans. Marcus walked past the custodial exit just as I was leaving. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, the picture of a hardworking professional. "Still here, Jacqueline? Don't you have a second job to get to? I heard McDonald's is hiring." "Have a good evening, Marcus," I said quietly. He shook his head like I was some kind of curiosity. "You know what I don't get about people like you? You just accept it. No ambition, no drive to improve yourself. My dad always said some people are just meant to clean up after others." I watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. People like you. The phrase stuck in my mind as I rode the elevator down to the parking garage. But not to catch the bus, like everyone assumed. My car was parked in the visitor section, a modest Honda Civic that wouldn't draw attention. I'd specifically chosen something unremarkable. The drive across town took 20 minutes in evening traffic. I pulled into the parking lot of a sleek office building. Nothing too flashy, but clearly a step up from the industrial complex where Meridian Technologies was housed. The sign by the entrance read, Summit Dynamics Software Solutions. My company. I badged into the building and took the elevator to the third floor. The Summit Dynamics office was buzzing with activity, even at this hour. My team of 12 developers, designers, and business analysts worked flexible schedules, but most chose to stay late because they believed in what we were building. Jacqueline. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her workstation, her multiple monitors displaying lines of code that would have looked like hieroglyphics to most people. Perfect timing. We just finished the stress tests on the new authentication module. I dropped my bag by my desk and pulled up the results on my computer. The numbers were impressive. Our project management software wasn't just competitive with existing solutions. It was revolutionary. We'd solved problems that industry giants had been struggling with for years. How are we looking for the investor presentation next week? I asked. David Park, my lead designer, wheeled his chair over. UI mock-ups are ready. The prototype is running smoothly. Honestly, Jacqueline, I think we're about to change everything. I nodded, scanning through the presentation slides on his screen. We were seeking Series B funding, $25 million, that would let us scale rapidly and capture market share before the big players realized what was happening. The preliminary meetings had gone better than I'd dared to hope. What about our beta clients? I asked. Any feedback from this week? Lisa Chen, our head of customer relations, looked up from her desk across the room. Glowing reviews across the board. Productivity increases by 30 to 40%. And get this, 3 of them asked if we'd be interested in acquisition discussions. I felt a familiar thrill, the same feeling I'd had 18 months ago when I first conceived this idea. Back then I was working double shifts at a call center, living in a studio apartment with a Murphy bed, eating ramen noodles for dinner. The idea had come to me during one of those endless nights answering customer service calls about software that didn't work properly. Hey, I could build something better. I knew I could. The first step had been learning to code, spending every free hour on online tutorials and programming forums. Then came the business plan, written and rewritten dozens of times on legal pads because I couldn't afford a laptop. I'd pitched the idea to anyone who would listen, collecting rejection after rejection, until finally, miraculously, I found an angel investor who believed in my vision. That investor had introduced me to others. Slowly, carefully, I'd built a team and a product. And I'd done it all while working minimum wage jobs, maintaining the facade of someone who had no prospects, no ambitions, beyond getting through each day. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was important. It was about proving something to myself. And maybe, if I was being honest, proving something to people like Marcus and Trevor and Sarah. The custodial job at Meridian Technologies hadn't been random. I'd specifically applied there 6 months ago, after learning that they were struggling with outdated project management systems. Their inefficiencies were legendary in the industry. Missed deadlines, cost overruns, frustrated clients. They were bleeding money and didn't seem to know how to stop it. I wanted to see the problem from the inside, to understand exactly what wasn't working. Every day, as I emptied their trash cans and wiped down their whiteboards, I observed their processes. I saw the confusion in their meetings, the duplicate work, the communication breakdowns that cost them thousands of dollars in wasted effort. But I also saw something else. Opportunity. Meridian Technologies was the kind of mid-sized company that could benefit enormously from what we were building. They had enough complexity to need sophisticated solutions, but not enough resources to develop those solutions internally. They were exactly our target market. And if things went according to plan, they were about to become much more than that. Jacqueline? Amy's voice brought me back to the present. You looked like you were somewhere else for a minute. I smiled. Just thinking about next week. Are we ready for the Goldman Sachs meeting? More than ready, David said. This is going to be huge. I stayed at the office until nearly midnight, reviewing code, refining our pitch materials, and strategizing with my team about the months ahead. When I finally drove home to my small apartment, I felt the familiar exhaustion that came from living two completely different lives. At Meridian Technologies, I was invisible, forgettable, someone who existed on the margins of their world. Here at Summit Dynamics, I was a leader, a visionary, someone who commanded respect and attention. The contrast was jarring, but it had served its purpose. In my apartment, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. My laptop was open on the coffee table, displaying spreadsheets that showed Summit Dynamics' growth trajectory. If our projections were correct, we'd be profitable within 18 months and ready for major expansion within 2 years. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. More importantly, we'd be ready to start making acquisitions. I'd done my research on Meridian Technologies' financial situation. They were hemorrhaging money, losing clients to more efficient competitors, struggling to adapt to an increasingly digital marketplace. Their stock price had dropped 60% over the past 2 years. The board was getting restless, and rumors of potential layoffs circulated regularly through the office gossip network. Companies in that position were often receptive to acquisition offers, especially from buyers who could promise to preserve jobs and improve operations. And I had plans for improving operations. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney, Patricia Wells. Meridian preliminary research complete. Financial review confirms your assessment. They're vulnerable. Let me know when you're ready to proceed. I set the phone aside and sipped my tea, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Patricia 2 months ago. She was one of the few people who knew about both sides of my life, and she'd been skeptical when I first outlined my long-term strategy. "You want to buy the company where you work as a janitor?" she'd said, raising an eyebrow. "That's either brilliant or insane." "Maybe both," I'd admitted. "But think about it. I understand their operations better than any outside buyer could. I know their weaknesses, their inefficiencies, their culture problems. I know exactly what needs to be fixed. And you want to fix it with them watching? I want them to see what they missed, what they assumed wasn't possible." Patricia had smiled at that. Revenge acquisition. I have to admit, I've never handled one of those before. It wasn't entirely about revenge, though I couldn't deny that the thought of Marcus and Trevor and Sarah learning my real identity held a certain appeal. It was about transformation, about taking a struggling company and showing what it could become under different leadership. It was about proving that the person they saw emptying their trash cans had been building something extraordinary while they laughed. The next morning, I was back in the custodial closet at 7 a.m., pulling on rubber gloves and preparing for another day of invisibility. But as I loaded cleaning supplies onto my cart, I couldn't help but smile. Goldman Sachs was expecting us at 2 p.m. By the end of the week, Summit Dynamics might have the funding we needed to move to the next phase. And Meridian Technologies had no idea what was coming. The Goldman Sachs conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked half of downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting, and I had to resist the urge to press my face against the glass. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined sitting at this polished mahogany table, facing 3 of the most influential venture capitalists on the West Coast. Rebecca Morrison, Goldman's lead tech investor, studied our presentation materials with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her navy blazer probably cost more than I made in 2 months at Meridian. To her left sat James Fletcher, younger but equally sharp, his fingers dancing across a tablet as he took notes. The third investor, Catherine Yang, had barely looked up from our financial projections for the past 20 minutes. "Your user retention rates are impressive," Rebecca said finally, looking up from the documents. 93% after 6 months. That's exceptional for project management software. I nodded, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. We focused on solving real pain points rather than adding flashy features. Our beta clients tell us we've saved them an average of 15 hours per week in administrative overhead. James leaned forward. Walk me through your scaling strategy. You're asking for 25 million, but your current team is only 12 people. How do you plan to grow without losing quality control? This was the question I'd been preparing for. We've identified 3 key hiring phases. First, we'll expand our development team to handle enterprise-level customization. Second, we'll build out sales and customer success teams in major markets. Third, we'll establish partnerships with existing software providers to integrate our solutions into their ecosystems. Catherine finally looked up from her tablet. What about competition? Microsoft? Oracle? Salesforce? They all have project management tools. What happens when they notice what you're doing? They're building for everyone, I replied. We're building for companies that have been underserved by one-size-fits-all solutions. Our algorithm adapts to workflow patterns instead of forcing users to adapt to the software. By the time the big players pivot to our approach, we'll have captured the market segment that values efficiency over brand recognition. The presentation continued for another hour. Amy demonstrated our user interface while David explained our technical architecture. Lisa shared testimonials from beta clients who had seen dramatic productivity improvements. I watched the investors' faces carefully, looking for tells that might indicate their level of interest. Rebecca's questions were probing but not hostile. James seemed particularly interested in our intellectual property portfolio. Catherine kept asking about financial projections, which I took as a positive sign. If she was worried about our business model, she wouldn't be focusing on the numbers. When we finished, Rebecca stood and shook hands with each of us. We'll need to do some additional due diligence, but I'm impressed with what you've built. Expect to hear from us within 2 weeks. As we rode the elevator down to street level, my team was practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see how Catherine's eyes lit up when you talked about the enterprise contracts? Amy whispered, even though we were alone in the elevator. And James asking about patent protection, David added. That's not a question you ask unless you're serious about investing. I felt the same excitement, but also a growing sense of urgency. $25 million would change everything. It would give us the resources to accelerate our timeline, to move faster than I'd originally planned. So, it would also bring me closer to my real goal. The next morning at Meridian Technologies, I arrived early as usual and began my rounds on the executive floor. The corner office belonged to CEO Jonathan Blake, a man in his early 60s who'd been with the company for 15 years. His desk was covered with financial reports, and I couldn't help but notice the red ink on several of the documents as I emptied his wastebasket. 2 doors down, CFO Michael Stone was on a conference call, his voice carrying through the thin walls. We're looking at a 12% revenue decline in Q3, he was saying. The board is going to want answers, and frankly, I'm not sure we have any good ones. I moved quietly through the offices, invisible as always, but my mind was racing. Meridian's financial situation was worse than I'd realized. A 12% decline in a single quarter suggested serious operational problems, not just market fluctuations. In the break room, the usual suspects were gathered around the coffee machine. Sarah Chen was showing photos from her weekend trip to Napa Valley, while Marcus and Trevor discussed their plans for March Madness brackets. Did you guys hear about the layoffs at Technosoft? Trevor said, stirring cream into his coffee. 15% of their workforce, gone. Makes you appreciate job security, you know. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. Job security? In this market, I'm updating my LinkedIn profile every week just in case. Come on, Sarah said. Meridian's not going anywhere. We've been around for 20 years. Some of these startup companies come and go, but established firms like ours, we're stable. I continued wiping down the tables, fighting the urge to speak up. Established didn't mean stable. In fact, established often meant slow to adapt, resistant to change, vulnerable to disruption by more agile competitors. Later that afternoon, I was cleaning the conference room when Jonathan Blake and Michael Stone entered with 3 other executives I recognized as department heads. They didn't seem to notice me as they began what was clearly an urgent strategy meeting. The Peterson Group contract fell through, Michael was saying as he opened his laptop. That's $2 million in projected revenue we can write off. What happened? Asked Linda Morris, the head of operations. Same thing that always happens, Jonathan replied grimly. They said our project management was inefficient. Too many delays, too much back and forth, not enough transparency in the process. They went with a smaller firm that promised better oversight. I slowed my cleaning, focusing on a spot on the table that didn't really need attention. This is the third major client we've lost this quarter, said Robert Kim, who ran business development. We're getting consistent feedback that our project delivery is outdated. So what's the solution? Linda asked. We can't just keep losing clients. Michael pulled up a spreadsheet on the wall-mounted screen. I've been researching project management software options. There are some promising solutions, but implementation would cost at least $2 million, and we'd need 6 months to train everyone on new systems. $2 million we don't have, Jonathan said flatly, and 6 months is too long. We need improvements now, not next year. I finished cleaning the table and moved toward the door, but Jonathan's next words stopped me cold. There's another option, he said quietly. Brennan Industries has been making acquisition offers to companies in our position. They're promising to preserve jobs while modernizing operations. Acquisition? Robert sounded shocked. You mean selling the company? It might be our best option, Michael said. Brennan has the resources to invest in new systems, new processes. They could turn this around. And what happens to us? Linda asked. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Some of us would survive the transition. Others. He didn't finish the sentence. I slipped out of the conference room, my mind reeling. Brennan Industries was a corporate acquisition firm known for buying struggling companies, stripping out inefficiencies, and either flipping them for profit or breaking them apart for assets. If Meridian was seriously considering their offer, things were even worse than I'd realized. But it also meant my window of opportunity was smaller than I'd thought. That evening at Summit Dynamics, I called an emergency team meeting. Everyone gathered in our main conference room, and I could see the concern on their faces when I explained what I'd overheard. So they're considering selling to Brennan? Amy asked. That could complicate things. Actually, it might help us, I said. If they're desperate enough to consider Brennan, they'll be more receptive to other offers, especially offers that come with better terms for existing employees. David looked confused. Are you saying we should make an offer now, before we even have the Goldman Sachs funding? I'm saying we need to be ready to move fast, I replied. Patricia is already working on preliminary paperwork. If Goldman comes through, we could have an offer on the table within weeks. Lisa leaned forward. What about the due diligence process? Don't acquisitions usually take months? Usually, yes. But Meridian is motivated to move quickly, and we have inside knowledge of their operations that other buyers wouldn't have. I paused, looking around the room at my team. There's something else. I want to make the offer personally. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Amy spoke up. You mean you want them to know it's you? The person they've been treating like hired help, I finished. Yes, I want them to know exactly who's making the offer. David whistled softly. That's bold. And probably very satisfying. It's not about satisfaction, I said, though that wasn't entirely true. It's about sending a message, about what happens when you underestimate people. Over the next few days, I watched Meridian's situation deteriorate rapidly. The executive team was clearly under enormous pressure, and that pressure was trickling down to the rest of the staff. The usual break-room banter became more subdued, replaced by whispered conversations about job security and resume updates. Marcus seemed particularly on edge, snapping at a junior analyst who spilled coffee in the hallway. Watch where you're going, he said harshly. Some of us are trying to work here. Sarah had started staying late every night, presumably trying to make herself indispensable. Trevor was the opposite, leaving exactly at 5 p.m. and avoiding any additional responsibilities. But their attitude toward me hadn't changed. If anything, the stress seemed to make them more hostile. Still here, Jacqueline? Marcus said as I emptied the trash can next to his desk. Don't you have somewhere more important to be? Oh, wait, This is as important as it gets for you, isn't it? I looked at him steadily. Everyone has their role to play. Right, he said with a laugh. Your role is to clean up after people who actually contribute something to society. What he didn't know was that I'd just received a text from Rebecca Morrison. Goldman Sachs was ready to move forward with funding. The due diligence had been completed, the terms were favorable, and the money would be available within 2 weeks. What none of them knew was that their company was about to change hands. And what they really didn't know was who the new owner would be. That evening, I sat in my apartment with Patricia Wells, going over the final details of our acquisition strategy. She'd spread legal documents across my coffee table, each one representing a different aspect of the deal we were about to propose. Meridian's stock price has dropped another 8% this week, she said, reviewing the latest market data on her laptop. That brings their market cap down to roughly $42 million. With their debt load, we're looking at a total acquisition cost of around $55 million. And we'll have $65 million available after the Goldman funding closes, I said. That gives us room for transition costs and initial improvements. Patricia nodded. The timeline is aggressive but doable. We make the offer 2 days after funding closes, before Brennan or anyone else has time to present competing bids. What about employee retention? I asked. This was the part that mattered most to me. I want guarantees that existing staff will be protected during the transition. We can structure it so that any layoffs require your personal approval, as CEO, Patricia replied. In fact, that might be an attractive selling point for their board. Brennan Industries has a reputation for significant workforce reductions. I studied the documents, imagining the moment when I would walk into Jonathan Blake's office, not as a custodial worker, but as the person offering to buy his company. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. There's one more thing, I said to Patricia. I want to make the offer in person, at their offices, during business hours. She raised an eyebrow. That's unconventional. Usually, these initial discussions happen in neutral locations. This isn't a usual situation. Patricia smiled. No, I suppose it isn't. Should I arrange for security? Security? In case they don't take the news well. I thought about Marcus and his casual cruelty, about Sarah's condescending charity offers, about Trevor's assumption that I had no ambitions beyond my current position. I think I can handle their reaction, I said. As Patricia packed up her documents, she paused at the door. Jacqueline, you realize this is about to change your life completely. Once you do this, there's no going back to anonymity. I looked out my window at the city lights, thinking about all the nights I'd sat here planning and working while they assumed I was watching television or reading magazines. I've been ready for that change for a long time. What I wasn't ready for was what would happen when Marcus Hendricks discovered that the woman he'd been mocking for months was about to become his boss. Or when Sarah Chen realized that her charity offers had been directed at someone who could buy and sell her entire department. The Goldman Sachs funding came through on a Friday afternoon. Rebecca Morrison called personally to deliver the news, and I could hear the excitement in her voice as she outlined the next steps. By Monday morning, I would have access to $65 million and the power to reshape Meridian Technologies however I saw fit. But first, I had one more weekend of being invisible. One more weekend of letting them think they knew who I was. Come Monday, everything would change. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched the mood inside Meridian Technologies. I clocked in at 7 a.m. as usual, but this time I carried myself differently. $65 million was sitting in Summit Dynamics' business account, and Patricia Wells had scheduled our acquisition offer presentation for Wednesday at 2 p.m. But first, I needed to gather intelligence. The executive floor was buzzing with unusual activity. Jonathan Blake had called an all-hands meeting for 10 a.m., and assistants were scrambling to set up additional chairs in the main conference room. I moved through the offices methodically, emptying trash cans and dusting surfaces, but my real focus was on the conversations happening around me. Emergency meeting, I heard Linda Morris telling her assistant as I cleaned the hallway outside her office. Jonathan's going to announce cost-cutting measures. Probably layoffs. In Michael Stone's office, the CFO was on yet another tense phone call. No, we can't extend the payment terms again, he was saying to someone on the other end. Our credit line is already maxed out. We need cash flow, not more debt. I made note of everything. building a clearer picture of just how desperate Meridian's situation had become. When I reached the break room, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. The usual morning chatter had been replaced by worried whispers and nervous glances. Marcus sat alone at a corner table, staring at his phone with the expression of someone reading bad news. Trevor was pacing by the windows, coffee forgotten in his hand. Sarah stood with a group of marketing coordinators, but their conversation died the moment I entered. "Perfect timing," Sarah said loudly, her voice dripping with false cheer. "Maybe our custodial staff has some insights into cost-saving measures. You know all about doing more with less, right, Jacqueline?" The group laughed, but it sounded forced. Fear had a way of making people cruel, and Sarah's cruelty was sharper than usual this morning. "Actually," I said quietly, setting down my cleaning supplies, "I do know something about efficiency." The room went silent. It was the first time I'd ever responded to one of their jabs with anything other than polite deflection. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Oh, really? Please, enlighten us with your wisdom." I looked around the room, taking in their faces. Marcus had stopped scrolling through his phone. Trevor had stopped pacing. Even people from other departments had turned to listen. "Sometimes the biggest inefficiencies come from not seeing what's right in front of you," I said. "People make assumptions about what's valuable and what isn't. They miss opportunities because they're looking in the wrong direction." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Linda Morris's voice echoed through the building's intercom system. "All staff to the main conference room, for a mandatory meeting. All staff to the main conference room." The break room emptied quickly as everyone filed toward the elevator banks. I collected my supplies and took the stairs, arriving at the conference room just as Jonathan Blake stepped up to the podium. The room was packed. Employees filled every chair and lined the walls. The energy was tense, expectant. Jonathan looked tired, older than his 62 years, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of bad news. "I'll get straight to the point," he began. "Meridian Technologies is facing significant financial challenges. We've lost 3 major clients this quarter. Our operational costs are exceeding revenue, and our competitive position in the market has deteriorated." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stood near the back, watching faces as the reality of the situation sank in. "We're exploring several options to address these challenges," Jonathan continued. "Cost reduction, operational restructuring, and strategic partnerships are all on the table. We're also in preliminary discussions with potential investors who might help us stabilize and grow." Someone from the back called out, "Does this mean layoffs?" Jonathan paused, his jaw tightening. "We're hoping to avoid workforce reductions, but I can't make any guarantees. Our priority is preserving as many jobs as possible while returning the company to profitability." More questions followed, each one revealing deeper concerns. How long did they have? Which departments were most at risk? Were executives taking pay cuts? Jonathan answered what he could, but his responses were vague, clearly crafted by lawyers and PR consultants. As the meeting broke up, I watched the crowd's reaction. Some people looked shell-shocked, others seemed angry. A few were already pulling out their phones, probably updating their resumes or calling headhunters. Marcus pushed past me on his way out, his face flushed with frustration. "This is unbelievable," he muttered to Trevor. "I turned down that offer from Peterson Group last month because I thought this place was stable." "Maybe we should start networking," Trevor replied. "I heard Brennan Industries might be interested in acquiring us. They pay well, but they also clean the house pretty thoroughly." I followed them back to their department, maintaining my invisible routine while listening to their increasingly panicked discussions. The morning's arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the raw fear of people who suddenly realized their assumptions about job security had been wrong. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the building that Brennan Industries was indeed in talks with Meridian's board. I overheard Robert Kim confirming it to a group of business development staff, though he tried to sound optimistic about the prospects. "Brennan has a good reputation for turning companies around," he said. "Yes, there are usually some personnel changes, but they also bring capital investment and operational expertise." What he didn't mention, but what I knew from my research, was that Brennan's personnel changes typically involved laying off 30 to 40% of the workforce and replacing middle management with their own people. I spent the afternoon on the executive floor, gathering more intelligence while appearing to focus on my cleaning duties. Michael Stone's office was a goldmine of information. Financial reports were scattered across his desk, and I could see the full scope of Meridian's problems laid out in stark numbers. Revenue down 18% year over year. Operating costs up 12%. Client retention rate at 68%, well below industry standards. Cash flow projections showed they'd be in serious trouble within 6 months if nothing changed. But there was something else in those reports. Something that made me pause in my dusting. Meridian owned valuable intellectual property, including several software patents that could be worth millions in the right hands. They also had long-term contracts with government agencies that provided steady, if modest, revenue streams. Kutal, the company wasn't worthless. It was mismanaged. In Jonathan Blake's office, I found draft correspondence with 3 different potential buyers. Brennan Industries was offering $48 million for a complete acquisition, with the caveat that they made no promises about employee retention. A private equity firm called Apex Capital was proposing a $35 million buyout with plans to break up the company and sell its assets. The third letter was from a consulting firm offering to restructure operations for a percentage of future profits. None of the offers addressed the real problems. They were all focused on extracting value rather than creating it. I photographed the documents with my phone, careful to leave everything exactly as I'd found it. Then I made my way back to the custodial closet and called Patricia Wells. "I've seen their financials," I told her quietly. "It's worse than we thought, but also better." "Explain." "Their operational problems are severe, but the underlying assets are solid. Patents, government contracts, established client relationships. Brennan is offering $48 million, which means they see value that Meridian's current management is missing." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "So we need to offer more than $48 million? "We need to offer something better than money," I said. "We need to offer a future that includes their current employees." That evening at Summit Dynamics, I gathered my team for a crucial strategy session. The conference room was buzzing with nervous energy as everyone processed what we were about to attempt. $55 million, Amy said, staring at the acquisition proposal Patricia had drafted. "That's more than our entire company is worth." "It's an investment," I replied. "Meridian has contracts worth over $100 million over the next 3 years. If we can improve their operational efficiency by just 20%, the acquisition pays for itself." David looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing Meridian's technical infrastructure. "Their systems are ancient. We could modernize everything, integrate our project management software, and streamline their workflows. The productivity gains would be enormous." "What about cultural integration?" Lisa asked. "These are people who've been working in established ways for years. Change management is going to be challenging." I thought about Marcus and Sarah and Trevor, about their casual dismissal of anyone they considered beneath them. Some people adapt to change better than others. We'll work with those who want to grow, and we'll help transition those who don't. And by transition, you mean? I mean we'll be fair but firm. Performance-based employment. People who contribute to the company's success will thrive. People who don't, I shrugged, will have opportunities to find positions that better suit their skills. Amy grinned. "This is really happening, isn't it? We're gonna buy them." "If they accept our offer," I said. "Patricia thinks we have a good chance. Better terms for employees, higher purchase price, and faster closing timeline than Brennan can offer." "What happens after we own them?" David asked. "Do you plan to reveal who you are right away?" I'd been thinking about this question for weeks. The moment of revelation would be delicate, requiring careful timing and presentation. "I want to make the offer first as CEO of Summit Dynamics," I said. "Let them process the business proposition. Then, once they've accepted, I'll introduce myself properly." "That's going to be quite a shock," Lisa said with a smile. I almost wish I could be there to see their faces. "Actually," I said, "I want all of you there. This is as much your victory as mine. You've built something incredible, and I want Meridian staff to see the team that's going to help transform their company." We spent the next several hours refining our presentation, practicing our pitch, and preparing for every possible question or objection. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight, but everyone seemed energized rather than tired. As my team packed up their materials, Amy lingered behind. "Jacqueline," she said quietly, "are you sure about the personal aspect of this? Revealing your identity could complicate the business relationship." I considered her question. She was right that mixing personal satisfaction with business strategy was risky. But this acquisition wasn't just about money or market share. It was about proving something important. 6 months ago, they looked at me and saw someone with no value, no potential, no future, I said. Tomorrow, they're going to learn that the person they dismissed was building something they couldn't imagine. That's not about revenge. It's about changing how they see the world. Amy nodded slowly. And changing how they treat people in the future. Exactly. The next morning at Meridian Technologies, the atmosphere was even more tense than the day before. Word had leaked that the board was meeting that afternoon to discuss the various acquisition offers, and everyone knew decisions were imminent. I went about my normal routine, but with heightened awareness of every conversation, every worried glance, every whispered speculation about the future. In the break room, Sarah was holding court with her usual audience, but her confidence seemed forced. "Honestly, I'm not worried," she was saying, stirring sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary. "Good talent always lands on their feet. Companies like Brennan recognize value when they see it." Marcus nodded, but his agreement lacked conviction. "Right. And if they don't, there are other opportunities out there. The market is strong for experienced professionals." I finished wiping down their table and moved toward the exit. But Sarah's voice stopped me. "Jacqueline," she called out sweetly, "you've been awfully quiet lately. Aren't you concerned about the changes coming? I mean, new management might have different standards for support staff." The implication was clear. She was suggesting that I should be worried about losing my job, that people like me were expendable in times of change. "Change can be good," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Sometimes it reveals things people didn't know were there." For just a moment, Sarah's confident expression flickered. There was something in my tone, something in my posture, that didn't match her expectations of how I should respond. But the moment passed, and her smile returned. "Well, I'm sure you'll figure something out. People like you always do." As I left the break room, I heard Trevor say, "Was it just me, or did she seem different lately?" "Different? How?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. Less submissive, I guess." They had no idea how right he was. In less than 24 hours, I would walk back into this building not as their custodial worker, but as their potential new owner. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m., and Patricia had confirmed that Jonathan Blake, Michael Stone, and the entire board of directors would be in attendance. They were expecting to meet with the CEO of Summit Dynamics, a successful tech entrepreneur interested in acquiring their company. What they weren't expecting was that the CEO they'd be meeting with was someone they already knew, someone they'd spent months treating as invisible, someone who'd been listening to every careless word, observing every casual cruelty, and building something extraordinary while they assumed she was building nothing at all. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. Wednesday morning arrived with complications I hadn't anticipated. I was in the supply closet, checking my phone for final updates from Patricia, when I overheard Michael Stone's voice echoing down the hallway. He was speaking rapidly, urgently, to someone on his cell phone. "What do you mean Brennan moved up their deadline? Today? But we told them Friday." His voice trailed off as he walked further away, but I'd heard enough. Something had changed in the acquisition timeline, and it wasn't in our favor. I quickly texted Patricia. "Brennan may be accelerating their offer. Need intel ASAP." Her response came within minutes. "Confirmed. They're presenting at 11 a.m. Emergency board meeting called. Our 2 p.m. slot may be too late." My stomach dropped. 6 months of planning, weeks of preparation, and now a scheduling conflict threatened to derail everything. But as I stood there in the dim supply closet, surrounded by cleaning products and industrial equipment, I realized something important. I had advantages that Brennan Industries didn't. I was already inside. I abandoned my cleaning cart and made my way to the executive floor. The energy was electric with crisis management. Assistants rushed between offices carrying documents. Phone calls overlapped in urgent conversations. The Brennan presentation was clearly forcing everyone into panic mode. Jonathan Blake's assistant, a nervous woman named Jennifer Park, was trying to coordinate multiple calendar changes simultaneously. I approached her desk with my usual invisibility, emptying her wastebasket while listening to her phone calls. "Yes, the conference room is booked until noon," she was telling someone. "No, we can't move the Brennan meeting. Mr. Blake specifically requested." "What? Another company wants to present today too? How many offers are we dealing with?" I moved closer, dusting the filing cabinets behind her desk. "Summit Dynamics?" Jennifer continued. "I've never heard of them. Are you sure they're legitimate? Tech startup. $65 million funding. The CEO wants to present it personally." Her voice rose with stress. "Fine. I'll tell Mr. Blake, but he's not going to be happy about back-to-back presentations on the same day." This was my opening. I stepped forward slightly, just enough to get Jennifer's attention. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Is there anything I can help with? You seem overwhelmed." Jennifer looked up, distracted and frazzled. "Oh, Jacqueline. No, just boardroom logistics. Multiple meetings today. It's chaos." "Would it help if I made sure the conference room is perfectly set up between meetings?" I offered. "Fresh water, clean whiteboards, proper seating arrangements." She looked at me with something approaching gratitude. "Actually, yes, that would be incredibly helpful. The Brennan people are very particular about presentation setups." "I'll take care of everything," I assured her. "What time do you need the room ready?" "Brennan presents at 11. Then we have a short break, and Summit Dynamics presents at 1:30. Their CEO specifically requested the earlier time slot." I nodded, filing away this information. Patricia had managed to move our presentation up by 30 minutes, giving us a chance to follow immediately after Brennan's pitch. It was risky but potentially advantageous. The board would be able to compare offers directly. As I prepared the conference room for Brennan's presentation, I took the opportunity to install a small recording device near the audio-visual equipment. It wasn't exactly legal, but I needed to know what we were up against. The device was virtually invisible, disguised as part of the cable management system. At 10:45 a.m., the Brennan Industries team arrived. 3 people in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios and confident expressions. I recognized the lead representative from business publications, Victoria Brennan herself, the company's founder and CEO. She was known for her aggressive acquisition style and ruthless efficiency improvements. I remained in the room, ostensibly cleaning the windows while they set up their presentation materials. Their conversation was revealing. "The financial situation is worse than our initial assessment," Victoria was telling her colleagues. "They're essentially bankrupt. We can probably negotiate them down to $40 million if we emphasize the urgency." "What about employee retention?" asked one of her associates. Victoria laughed coldly. "We'll keep maybe 30% of the current workforce. The rest are dead weight. This company has been coasting on legacy contracts for years. Time to trim the fat." I continued cleaning, invisible and ignored, while they discussed their plans to essentially gut Meridian Technologies. When the board members began filing in, I made my exit, but not before activating the recording device. The Brennan presentation lasted exactly 1 hour. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see animated discussions, spreadsheets displayed on screens, and serious nodding from board members. Victoria Brennan commanded the room with the authority of someone who'd done this dozens of times before. When they finished, I watched the board members' faces as they shook hands with the Brennan team. Jonathan Blake looked relieved but tired. Michael Stone seemed impressed but concerned. Linda Morris appeared skeptical about something. As the Brennan team departed, I overheard Victoria telling Jonathan, "We'll need a decision by the end of business today. This offer expires at 5 p.m. sharp." Pressure tactics. Classic Brennan Industries strategy. During the break between presentations, I retrieved my recording device and quickly reviewed the audio on my phone. What I heard was even worse than I'd expected. Victoria had outlined plans to sell off Meridian's government contracts to competitors, lay off 2/3 of the workforce, and strip the company's intellectual property for resale. They weren't acquiring Meridian to improve it, they were acquiring it to destroy it profitably. At 1:15 p.m., I was back in the conference room, making final preparations when Patricia Wells arrived with Amy, David, and Lisa. My team looked nervous but determined, dressed in their best professional attire and carrying presentation materials that represented months of careful preparation. "Any last-minute intelligence?" Patricia asked quietly while the others set up their laptops. I handed her my phone with the Brennan recording queued up. "Listen to this. It changes everything." As Patricia listened through earbuds, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is exactly what we needed," she said finally. "Brennan isn't offering to save this company. They're offering to kill it slowly." At 1:30 p.m. sharp, the board members filed back into the conference room. Jonathan Blake looked exhausted, clearly feeling the weight of making a decision that would affect hundreds of employees. Michael Stone carried a thick folder of financial documents. Linda Morris, Robert Kim, and 3 other board members took their seats around the polished table. I stood near the back wall, supposedly present to handle any facility needs during the presentation. To them, I was just part of the furniture, invisible and irrelevant. Patricia stood to begin our presentation. "Gentlemen, thank you for meeting with us on short notice. I'm Patricia Wells, representing Summit Dynamics and their CEO, who will be joining us momentarily." She launched into our opening, outlining Summit Dynamics' background, our recent Goldman Sachs funding, and our interest in acquiring Meridian Technologies. The board members listened politely, but without obvious enthusiasm. They'd just heard a presentation from an established acquisition firm with deep pockets and proven experience. Then Amy took over, demonstrating our project management software and explaining how it could revolutionize Meridian's operations. David followed with technical specifications, showing how integration would work seamlessly with existing systems. Lisa presented customer testimonials and productivity metrics from our beta clients. The board members were paying attention now. Questions flew about implementation timelines, training requirements, and compatibility with government contract specifications. Our team answered confidently, clearly, and professionally, but I could see skepticism in some faces. They were impressed with the technology, but uncertain about trusting their company's future to a relatively young startup. Then Patricia delivered the key information. Summit Dynamics is prepared to offer $58 million for complete acquisition of Meridian Technologies, she announced. This offer includes guarantees of employment protection for all current staff for a minimum of 18 months, plus performance-based bonuses for productivity improvements. The room stirred. $58 million was $10 million more than Brennan's offer, and the employment guarantees were unprecedented. Michael Stone leaned forward. "That's a generous offer, but Brennan Industries has a proven track record of successful acquisitions. Summit Dynamics is impressive, but you're essentially asking us to bet our company's future on a startup." "A startup with revolutionary technology and full funding," Patricia replied. "But you're right that trust is essential in any acquisition, which is why our CEO wants to address your concerns personally." She looked toward the back of the room, directly at me. "Jacqueline, would you join us?" The silence that followed was profound. Every head in the room turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Jonathan Blake's mouth actually dropped open. Michael Stone looked like he was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation in his head. I walked slowly to the front of the room, my footsteps echoing in the absolute quiet. When I reached the presentation area, I turned to face the board members. "Good afternoon," I said calmly. "I'm Jacqueline Morrison, CEO and founder of Summit Dynamics." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Jonathan Blake found his voice. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. You work here, in custodial services." "I do work here," I confirmed. "For the past 8 months, I've been observing Meridian's operations from a unique perspective. I've seen the inefficiencies, the communication breakdowns, the missed opportunities. I've also seen the potential." Robert Kim looked stunned. "You're saying you've been working as a janitor while running a tech company?" "I'm saying I've been gathering information while building solutions," I replied. "Everything my team just showed you, we developed with Meridian's specific needs in mind. We didn't research your problems from the outside, we experienced them from the inside." Michael Stone was shaking his head slowly. "This is unprecedented. I've never heard of anything like this." Linda Morris leaned forward. "Why? Why would someone with your resources and education take a minimum wage job?" I thought about Marcus and Sarah and Trevor, about all the casual cruelties and dismissive comments I'd endured over the past months. Because I wanted to understand what it felt like to be underestimated, I said. And because I wanted to see if a company's true culture matched its public image. The board members exchanged glances, processing the implications of what they'd just learned. Finally, Jonathan Blake spoke. Ms. Morrison, this is certainly unexpected, but we need to discuss this development privately before making any decisions. Of course, I said. We'll wait for your decision. But before you deliberate, there's something else you should know about Brennan Industries' offer. I nodded to Patricia, who activated the audio recording on her laptop. Victoria Brennan's voice filled the conference room, clearly outlining her plans to gut Meridian Technologies and sell off its assets. As the recording played, I watched the board members' faces change from surprise to anger to determination. When it finished, the room was silent again. How did you... Jonathan began. Occupational hazard of being invisible, I said simply. People say things in front of custodial staff that they'd never say in front of executives. Michael Stone looked at his colleagues. I think we have enough information to make a decision. As the board filed out for their private discussion, I remained in the conference room with my team and Patricia. Amy looked like she was still processing what had just happened. That was incredible, she whispered. Did you see their faces when Patricia called your name? The recording was brilliant, David added. They can't possibly choose Brennan after hearing that. But I wasn't celebrating yet. The personal revelation had been necessary, but it also introduced complications. Some board members might question my motives, wondering if this was an elaborate revenge scheme rather than a legitimate business acquisition. Through the glass walls, I could see heated discussions in Jonathan Blake's office. Gestures were animated, voices were raised, and more than once someone pointed toward the conference room where we waited. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Patricia checked her phone repeatedly, but there were no updates from anyone inside the company. Finally, Jennifer Park approached the conference room and knocked on the door. Mr. Blake would like to speak with Ms. Morrison privately, she said. The rest of your team is welcome to wait here. I followed Jennifer down the hallway to Jonathan's office, my heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety. Whatever decision they'd reached, it was about to change everything. Jonathan Blake stood behind his desk, looking older than his years but somehow more alert than I'd seen him in months. He gestured for me to sit, then remained standing himself. Jacqueline, he began, then stopped and shook his head. I'm sorry, Ms. Morrison. This is the most unusual situation I've encountered in 30 years of business. I waited, letting him process whatever he needed to say. Your offer is superior to Brennan's in every measurable way, he continued. Higher purchase price, better employee protections, technology integration that could revolutionize our operations. Any rational analysis would favor your proposal. But? I prompted. But we're struggling with the personal aspects of this situation. Some board members feel manipulated. They're questioning whether this entire scenario was designed to embarrass us or prove a point. I considered his words carefully before responding. Mr. Blake, 6 months ago I applied for a custodial position at this company. I was qualified for much better roles, but you hired me for exactly what I appeared to be. Nothing more, nothing less. And you used that position to spy on us. I used that position to understand you, I corrected. There's a difference between gathering intelligence for personal gain and gathering information to build better solutions. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. What happens to the employees who may have treated you poorly during your time here? I thought about Marcus and his casual cruelty, about Sarah's condescending charity, about Trevor's assumptions about my potential. What happens to them depends on what they bring to the company going forward, I said. I'm not interested in revenge, Mr. Blake. I'm interested in the results. He nodded slowly, then sat down across from me. The board has voted, he said. We accept Summit Dynamics' offer, with one condition. We want a detailed transition plan that outlines exactly how you intend to integrate our operations with your technology. Relief flooded through me, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. We can have that to you by tomorrow morning. There's one more thing, Jonathan said. We'd like to announce the acquisition to the entire company tomorrow afternoon. I assume you'll want to be part of that announcement? I smiled for the first time since entering his office. Yes, I think I would. As I walked back toward the conference room to share the news with my team, I passed the break room, where Marcus, Sarah, and Trevor were having what looked like a very serious conversation. They didn't notice me, too absorbed in their own concerns about the future. Tomorrow, they would discover that their future was now in the hands of the woman they'd spent months treating as invisible. Tomorrow, everything will change. Thursday morning felt different from the moment I walked through Meridian Technologies' front entrance. Instead of using the employee entrance by the loading dock, I strode through the main lobby in a tailored navy business suit, my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. The security guard, someone who'd seen me countless times in custodial uniforms, did a double take but said nothing. Tantum, I was no longer hiding. The overnight transition plan had been a masterpiece of strategic planning. Patricia and I had worked until 3 a.m., drafting documents that outlined every aspect of the integration process. Amy had created detailed technical specifications. David had mapped out timeline projections. Lisa had prepared employee communication strategies. By 8 a.m., all materials were in Jonathan Blake's hands. But first, I had one final morning as an observer. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, where the executive offices buzzed with nervous energy. Word of the acquisition had leaked, though details remained scarce. Assistants whispered in hallways. Department heads made hushed phone calls behind closed doors. Everyone knew change was coming, but no one knew exactly what form it would take. I walked past the break room, where the usual suspects were gathered for their morning coffee ritual. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw me. Sarah Chen nearly dropped her mug. "Jacqueline, what are you?" She looked me up and down, taking in the expensive suit, the confident posture, the complete transformation from the person they thought they knew. "Why are you dressed like that?" I paused in the doorway, meeting her confused gaze. "I have a meeting." Marcus Hendricks laughed nervously. "A meeting? What kind of meeting could you possibly—" His voice trailed off as uncertainty crept in. "The kind that determines the future of this company," I said simply. Trevor Walsh stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "What's going on here? Why are you talking like you're important?" The word hung in the air like a slap. Important. As if importance was something that could only belong to people like them, in positions like theirs, with backgrounds like theirs. "Am I unitary?" "Trevor," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something. When you look at people, what do you see first? Their potential? Or their position?" He blinked, clearly not expecting a philosophical question. What kind of question is that?" "An important one," I replied. "Because in about 3 hours, you're going to learn something about assumptions, about value, and about the cost of treating people as if they don't matter." Sarah had gone pale. "Jacqueline, you're scaring me. What are you talking about?" I looked around the break room, taking in their faces one last time. These people who had made my days miserable with their casual cruelty, their thoughtless comments, their absolute certainty that they were better than me. "I'm talking about consequences," I said, "and opportunities, and the difference between who you think you are and who you actually are." Before anyone could respond, I turned and walked away, leaving them to puzzle over my words. In Jonathan Blake's office, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The CEO sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing our transition documents with obvious approval. Michael Stone occupied one of the leather chairs, his expression thoughtful but positive. Linda Morris stood by the windows, looking out at the city with the air of someone contemplating major changes. "Your integration plan is impressive," Jonathan said as I entered. "Detailed, realistic, and ambitious. I'm particularly interested in the employee development programs you've outlined." I took a seat across from him. "Change is difficult for people. We want to make sure everyone has the tools and training they need to succeed in the new environment." "What about employees who resist change?" Michael asked. "Or who may have interpersonal conflicts with the new management structure?" It was a diplomatic way of asking what would happen to people who had treated me poorly during my time in custodial services. Performance speaks louder than politics, I replied. We'll evaluate everyone based on their contributions to the company's success. Past behavior matters less than future potential. Linda turned from the window. That's very magnanimous of you, considering some of the treatment you've described experiencing here. Magnanimous, maybe, but also practical. Revenge is expensive and counterproductive. Excellence is profitable and sustainable. Jonathan nodded approvingly. I've scheduled the company-wide announcement for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium. We'll need to communicate this carefully to minimize disruption and anxiety. What's our message strategy? I asked. Straightforward and positive, Michael replied. We'll announce the acquisition as an investment in the company's future. New technology, new resources, new opportunities for growth. And we'll introduce you as someone who understands this company from the ground up, Jonathan added with a slight smile. Literally. At noon, I returned to Summit Dynamics to brief my team on the afternoon's events. The office was electric, with excitement and nervous energy. Everyone understood that we were about to cross a threshold from startup to major player in the industry. Are you ready for this? Amy asked as we reviewed the final presentation materials. I mean, really ready? Because once you walk into that auditorium as CEO, there's no going back to anonymity. I thought about the past 8 months, about cleaning floors while building an empire, about enduring mockery while planning their future. I've been ready for this moment since the day Marcus Hendricks called me a minimum wage loser, I said. The question is whether they're ready for it. David looked up from his laptop. What if some of them quit? What if they can't handle working for someone they used to look down on? Then we'll hire people who can, I replied simply. The technology industry is full of talented individuals who value innovation over ego. At 1:45 p.m., I walked back into Meridian Technologies for what would be my final entrance as an unknown entity. The main auditorium was packed with every employee in the building. Conversations buzzed with speculation and anxiety. People clustered in departmental groups, seeking comfort in familiar colleagues. I spotted Marcus, Sarah, and Trevor sitting together in the middle section, their faces tense with uncertainty. Sarah kept glancing around nervously, as if looking for escape routes. Marcus sat rigidly upright, projecting false confidence. Trevor slouched in his chair, projecting defensive indifference. I took a position near the back wall, invisible once again in the crowd of employees. From this vantage point, I could observe everyone's reactions as the afternoon unfolded. Jonathan Blake stepped up to the podium at exactly 2 p.m. The auditorium fell silent. Hundreds of pairs of eyes focused on their CEO. Thank you all for coming, he began. I know there have been rumors and speculation about the company's future, and I want to address those concerns directly. He outlined Meridian's recent financial challenges without sugarcoating the severity of the situation. Revenue declines, client losses, operational inefficiencies. The audience listened with growing concern, some people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. However, Jonathan continued, I'm pleased to announce that these challenges have led to an extraordinary opportunity. Meridian Technologies has been acquired by Summit Dynamics, a cutting-edge software company with revolutionary project management solutions. Murmurs rippled through the auditorium. Some people looked relieved, others worried. The word acquisition could mean anything from salvation to mass layoffs. Summit Dynamics has committed to maintaining our entire workforce for a minimum of 18 months, Jonathan announced. They're also investing heavily in new technology, training programs, and operational improvements that will position us as an industry leader. The murmurs turned more positive. Job security was everyone's primary concern, and 18 months of guaranteed employment was more than most acquisitions offered. I'd like to introduce the CEO of Summit Dynamics, Jonathan said. Someone who understands our company better than any outside buyer possibly could. Someone who has observed our operations, our culture, and our potential from a unique perspective. He paused, scanning the auditorium. Jacqueline Morrison. The silence was absolute. Hundreds of people looked around, confused, searching for someone they didn't recognize. From my position at the back, I could see Marcus, Sarah, and Trevor craning their necks, trying to identify this mysterious CEO. I began walking down the center aisle. The first person to recognize me was Jennifer Park, Jonathan's assistant. Her gasp was audible, and her shocked expression caught the attention of people around her. Like a wave spreading through the auditorium, recognition dawned on face after face. By the time I reached the front of the room, the silence had become electric with disbelief. I stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. 8 months ago, I sat in an orientation session in this same auditorium, listening to presentations about company policies and workplace respect. Now I stood where those speakers had stood, looking out at the same faces that had looked past me for months. "Good afternoon," I said calmly. "For those who don't know me, I'm Jacqueline Morrison, CEO and founder of Summit Dynamics. For those who do know me, I'm the woman who's been emptying your trash cans for the past 8 months." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some people gasped, others laughed in astonishment. A few sat in stunned silence. In the middle section, I could see Marcus, Sarah, and Trevor looking like they'd been struck by lightning. "I know this comes as a surprise," I continued. "You're probably wondering why someone with the resources to start a tech company would choose to work in custodial services. The answer is simple. I wanted to understand this company from the inside out." I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing Summit Dynamics' growth trajectory over the past 18 months. While I was cleaning your offices, I was also building solutions to the problems I observed. Every inefficient process, every communication breakdown, every missed deadline taught me something about what needed to be fixed. The next slide showed our project management software interface. This technology was designed specifically with Meridian's needs in mind. We didn't guess at your pain points, we experienced them. We didn't assume what would work, we tested it in real-world conditions. I could see people throughout the auditorium leaning forward, genuinely interested despite their shock at my identity. "Some of you are probably wondering about job security under new management," I said. "Let me be clear, we're not here to eliminate positions, we're here to elevate performance. Everyone in this room will have opportunities to grow, to learn new skills, and to contribute to the company's success in ways you may not have imagined." A hand shot up in the audience. It was Robert Kim from Business Development. "Ms. Morrison, how do we know this isn't some kind of elaborate revenge scheme? I mean, the whole situation seems designed to embarrass the current management and staff." It was a fair question, and one I'd expected. "Robert, if I wanted revenge, I would have simply started a competing company and stolen your clients," I replied. "Instead, I invested $58 million in purchasing this company because I believe in its potential. Revenge is destructive. Investment is constructive." Another hand went up. Linda Morris from Operations. "What changes can we expect in the day-to-day operations?" "Significant changes, but implemented gradually," I said. "We'll be rolling out new project management systems, upgrading technical infrastructure, and providing comprehensive training programs. The goal is to make everyone's job easier and more productive, not more stressful." For the next 20 minutes, I fielded questions about everything from technology integration to reporting structures to compensation plans. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by genuine curiosity about what the future would hold. But I hadn't forgotten about the 3 people sitting in the middle section, the ones who had made my time here unnecessarily difficult. "Before we conclude," I said, "I want to address something directly. During my time working here, I experienced both kindness and cruelty from colleagues. Some people treated me with respect regardless of my position. Others," I paused, letting my gaze sweep across Marcus, Sarah, and Trevor. "Others made assumptions about my worth based on my job title." The auditorium was completely silent now, everyone sensing the weight of what I was about to say. "To those who showed kindness, thank you. Your behavior reflects the kind of culture we want to build. To those who didn't," I paused again. "I want you to understand that how you treat people says more about you than it does about them. And in a company culture based on respect and collaboration, that matters." Marcus had gone completely pale. Sarah was staring at her hands. Trevor looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "However," I continued, "I'm more interested in moving forward than looking backward. Everyone in this room will be evaluated based on their contributions to our shared success. Past behavior is less important than future potential. I clicked to the final slide, which showed a timeline for the integration process. The transition will begin Monday morning. Department heads will receive detailed implementation schedules by the end of this week. Training programs will start within 2 weeks. And I'll be here, working alongside all of you to ensure this transformation succeeds. As I concluded the presentation, the applause was cautious but genuine. People were still processing the revelation, but the practical benefits of the acquisition were becoming clear. Jonathan Blake returned to the podium for closing remarks, but I barely heard his words. I was watching the faces in the audience, seeing the mixture of emotions playing across them: excitement, uncertainty, respect, and in some cases, fear. As employees began filing out of the auditorium, several approached to introduce themselves and ask follow-up questions. Department heads wanted to discuss implementation details. Junior staff members seemed genuinely excited about training opportunities. But I was waiting for 3 specific people to approach me. They didn't. Marcus, Sarah, and Trevor slipped out of the auditorium quickly, avoiding eye contact, their usual confidence completely shattered. They knew their world had just changed fundamentally, and they weren't sure how to navigate their new reality. Amy appeared at my elbow, grinning widely. That was incredible. Did you see their faces when you started walking down the aisle? I saw, I replied, still watching the crowd thin out. What happens now? She asked. I thought about the months ahead, about the challenges of integrating 2 companies, about the delicate work of changing a culture while preserving what was valuable about it. Now we get to work, I said. The easy part is over. Amy laughed. That was the easy part? I smiled, looking around the auditorium one last time. Tomorrow, I will walk into this building as CEO. There would be no more cleaning carts, no more invisibility, no more enduring casual cruelty from people who thought they were better than me. Tomorrow, the real work will begin. Trust me, I said to Amy. The easy part is definitely over. 6 months had passed since the acquisition, and Meridian Technologies was unrecognizable from the struggling company I'd first observed as a custodial worker. The 15th floor now hummed with purposeful energy, state-of-the-art equipment replacing outdated systems, and collaborative workspaces where hierarchical barriers once stood. I stood in my corner office, reviewing quarterly reports that told a story of remarkable transformation. Revenue was up 43%. Client retention had improved to 91%. Employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Most importantly, we hadn't laid off a single person. Instead, we'd hired 37 new employees to handle our expanded operations. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Jennifer Park, who had transitioned from executive assistant to operations coordinator, peeked through the doorway. Ms. Morrison, you have a few minutes before the board meeting. But Marcus Hendricks is here. He says it's important. I nodded, setting aside my reports. Send him in. Marcus entered with an expression I'd never seen during my custodial days. Genuine humility. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by something resembling respect. He approached my desk hesitantly, as if uncertain of his welcome. Jacqueline? Ms. Morrison, he began, then stopped and shook his head. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to do this. Start with whatever you came to say, I suggested gently. He took a breath. I've been trying to work up the courage to have this conversation for months. What I did, how I treated you, there's no excuse for it. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit down, Marcus. He sat but remained rigid, uncomfortable. I keep thinking about all the things I said, all the assumptions I made, and the worst part is, I actually believed I was better than you. Not just in position, but as a person. What changed your mind? I asked. Everything, he said simply. Watching how you've transformed this company, how you've treated people who didn't deserve your kindness, including me. He paused, his voice growing quieter. You could have fired me on day 1, you had every reason to. I could have, I agreed. But firing you wouldn't have solved anything. It would have just transferred the problem somewhere else. Marcus looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since entering the office. The project management system you implemented, it's incredible. I'm handling twice as many clients with half the stress. My productivity reviews have never been better. You're good at your job, Marcus. You always were. The system just lets you focus on what you do well, instead of fighting inefficient processes. He was quiet for a moment. Sarah resigned last week. I nodded. I'd heard about Sarah's resignation from Linda Morris. She never adapted to the collaborative culture we're building here. Some people struggle with environments where respect is expected rather than optional. Trevor's been asking around about opportunities at other companies, Marcus continued. I think he's planning to leave too. That's his choice, I said. We've provided training, mentorship, and clear expectations. If he decides he'd rather work somewhere else, we'll support his transition. Marcus shifted in his chair. I want to stay, if you'll have me. Why? The question seemed to surprise him. Because I've learned something here. About myself, about how to treat people, about what real leadership looks like. I leaned back, studying his face. 6 months ago, this man had mocked my lunch choices and suggested I belonged in a trailer park. Now he sat in my office asking for a second chance. Marcus, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. You were never the problem. Your behavior was the problem. Behavior can change. Has it changed enough? He asked. I thought about the past 6 months, about the reports I'd received from his supervisors, about the way I'd observed him interacting with newer employees. You tell me, I said. When you see someone in a service position, what do you think now? I think about their potential, he replied without hesitation. I think about what I might not be seeing. I think about treating them the way I'd want to be treated. Then yes, it's changed enough. Relief flooded his features. Thank you. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm grateful for it. Everyone deserves a second chance, Marcus. The question is what they do with it. After he left, I had 15 minutes before the board meeting. I used the time to walk through the office floors, something I did regularly to stay connected with the day-to-day operations. The transformation was visible everywhere. The old hierarchical divisions had given way to integrated teams working on shared projects. The break rooms buzzed with productive conversations rather than gossip and complaints. People seemed genuinely engaged with their work, rather than just counting hours until quitting time. In the main break room, I encountered a scene that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Amy Rodriguez from Summit Dynamics was training a group of Meridian employees on advanced features of our project management software. The session was collaborative, interactive, with questions flowing freely in both directions. Ms. Morrison, called out Janet Webb, one of the accounting specialists. Perfect timing. Amy was just showing us how to integrate the new billing automation with our existing client contracts. I joined the group, listening as Amy explained the technical details with characteristic enthusiasm. The Meridian employees were engaged, asking thoughtful questions, clearly excited about the efficiency improvements. This is going to save us hours every week, said Robert Kim, who had emerged as one of our strongest advocates for the new systems. I wish we'd had this technology years ago. Better late than never, I replied with a smile. After the training session, I made my way to the executive conference room for our monthly board meeting. The agenda included quarterly financial reviews, strategic planning for the next fiscal year, and discussions about potential expansion into new markets. Jonathan Blake was already present, reviewing documents with obvious satisfaction. His role had evolved from struggling CEO to strategic advisor, and the change suited him well. Michael Stone occupied his usual seat, tablet open to the latest financial projections. Linda Morris was setting up presentation materials, her confidence and authority more evident than ever. Excellent results across all metrics, Jonathan said as I entered. I have to admit, 6 months ago I wouldn't have believed transformation on this scale was possible. People are capable of amazing things when they're given the right tools and environment, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. The meeting covered routine business matters, but the underlying tone was one of celebration. Every department was exceeding performance targets. Client satisfaction scores were at record highs. Our integration of Summit Dynamics technology had become a case study that other companies were trying to replicate. There's one item that's not on the agenda, Linda said as we wrapped up the formal business. The annual Employee Appreciation Dinner. We usually hold it at a local hotel, but given this year's exceptional performance, some people have suggested something more special. What kind of something? I asked. Michael smiled. The Four Seasons downtown. Full formal dinner, entertainment, recognition awards for outstanding contributions. I thought about the symbolism of such an event. A year ago, many of these employees had been worried about keeping their jobs. Now we were planning to celebrate their success at one of the city's most prestigious venues. Let's do it, I said, and let's make sure everyone understands this isn't just a party. It's a recognition of what we've built together. As the board meeting concluded, I remained in the conference room, looking out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere out there, other companies were struggling with the same problems Meridian had faced. Other employees were being undervalued, dismissed, or treated as disposable. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Wells. Goldman Sachs wants to discuss Series C funding. They're impressed with the Meridian integration results. Conference call tomorrow? I smiled, typing back. Absolutely. Time to think bigger. The Summit Dynamics acquisition of Meridian Technologies had exceeded everyone's expectations, but it was just the beginning. We'd proven that respectful leadership, innovative technology, and employee development could transform struggling companies into industry leaders. The model was scalable. That evening, I drove to my new apartment across town. The small studio where I'd eaten ramen noodles and planned my future had been replaced by a spacious loft with city views. But the real change wasn't in my living situation, it was in the possibilities that stretched ahead. I made dinner and settled on my couch with a glass of wine, reflecting on the journey from custodial worker to CEO. The hardest part hadn't been building the technology or securing funding or even managing the acquisition. The hardest part had been maintaining my dignity while being treated as if I had none. But that experience had taught me something valuable about leadership. Real authority doesn't come from titles or positions. It comes from understanding people, from seeing potential where others see limitations, from treating everyone with the respect they deserve rather than the respect their position commands. My laptop chimed with an email from Amy. The subject line read, "You need to see this." I opened the message to find a link to a Business Journal article titled, "The Custodian CEO, How Undercover Leadership Transformed a Failing Company." The piece detailed our acquisition and integration, positioning it as a new model for corporate leadership development. The article quoted several Meridian employees, including Marcus Hendricks. Ms. Morrison didn't just buy our company, she showed us what we were capable of becoming. She saw potential in people who had forgotten they had any. Another quote came from Robert Kim. "The most remarkable thing isn't that she was working as a custodian while running a tech company. It's that she treated everyone with equal respect regardless of their position. That's the kind of leader people want to follow." I closed the laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the lights scattered across the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that business success and human dignity weren't mutually exclusive. In 6 months, we'd transformed a struggling company into an industry leader. We'd proven that investing in people produced better returns than cutting costs. We'd demonstrated that respect and results weren't competing priorities. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was cultural. We'd created an environment where people like Marcus could recognize their mistakes and grow from them. Where people like Robert could discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Where people at every level could contribute their best work because they felt valued and respected. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jonathan Blake. "Jacqueline, I just wanted to call and say thank you. Not for the acquisition, not for the financial results, but for showing us what this company could become." "We all did that together," I replied. "No," he said firmly. "You saw it first. When the rest of us were focused on problems, you were building solutions. When we were managing decline, you were planning growth." After the call ended, I returned to the window, thinking about the future. The Series C funding would let us expand our model to other companies, other industries, other situations where human potential was being wasted. There were countless people working jobs that didn't reflect their capabilities, being treated as if their contributions didn't matter, waiting for someone to recognize their worth. There were companies struggling with the same problems Meridian had faced, unaware that their solutions might be hiding in plain sight. The custodian who had cleaned their offices was now their CEO. The minimum wage worker they'd dismissed as a loser was now leading their transformation. The person they'd treated as invisible was now shaping their future. Carefleas wasn't revenge, it was revolution. How see? A quiet revolution built on respect, powered by recognition, and driven by the simple belief that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, rather than what they appear to be. Tomorrow, I would wake up as the CEO of a thriving company, the leader of a growing movement, and the architect of a new way of thinking about business and human potential. But tonight, I was just grateful for the journey that had brought me here. Every insult had strengthened my resolve. Every moment of invisibility had sharpened my vision. Every assumption about my limitations had fueled my determination to exceed them. Highland. They had laughed at the minimum wage loser. Now they were working for the CEO, who remembered what it felt like to be underestimated. And that made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.